You can tell what someone worships by what they refuse to ignore. The lobby of Sterling Tower moved like a perfectly rehearsed machine, heels striking marble in steady rhythm, voices low and efficient, eyes trained to scan for importance and dismiss everything else. And in a place like this, importance had a uniform, tailored suits, polished shoes, voices that never hesitated, and Marcus Hale didn't wear any of it. His jacket was clean but worn at the edges. His boots carried the faint dust of real work, and when he stepped through the revolving doors, no one stopped him, but no one welcomed him either, which was its own kind of message. He paused just long enough to let the glass door settle behind him, taking in the quiet hum of status that filled the air like invisible pressure. Then he moved forward, steady, unhurried, like a man who had nowhere to prove himself to. Across the room, Victoria Sterling stood near the reception desk, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice calm but decisive. The kind of voice people didn't interrupt. Assistants hovered just close enough to be useful, but not enough to be seen. Her presence shaped the space without effort, and when her eyes lifted briefly from her screen, they passed over Marcus without stopping. A glance, a calculation, a conclusion, not important. Her gaze moved on, already occupied by something that mattered more. Marcus didn't react, not because he didn't notice, but because he had learned a long time ago that being unseen wasn't always a loss. Sometimes it was a kind of freedom. Near the elevators, a young employee fumbled with a paper cup, the lid slipping just enough for coffee to spill across her hand and onto the floor. She froze, eyes darting around, already bracing for the judgment that came fast in places like this. Marcus stepped in before anyone else moved, pulling a folded cloth from his back pocket, kneeling just enough to catch the spreading liquid before it reached her shoes. "You're good," he said quietly, his voice low, steady, like it belonged in a different kind of world. She blinked, surprised. I'm sorry," she murmured, not even sure who she was apologizing to. Marcus gave a small shake of his head, already wiping the last of the spill. "No harm done," he said. And just like that, he stood. No lecture, no expectation, no lingering for thanks. He simply stepped back into his place in the room, or rather, into the space the room hadn't assigned him. Victoria saw it this time. Not the spill, not the mistake, but him, the way he moved through it. No rush, no need to be seen doing something good. Her call ended mid-thought, her phone lowering just slightly as her eyes followed him for a second longer than before. There was no performance in what he did, no signal, no subtle glance around to check who noticed, and that absence of effort unsettled her in a way she couldn't immediately explain, because in her world, everything had a purpose. Every action was a step towards something measurable, something visible. But this was different. He helped, and then he disappeared back into the flow of people who would never think to remember his name. Victoria's assistant stepped in, already filling the silence with the next item on her schedule. But for a brief moment, Victoria didn't respond, her eyes still resting on the space Marcus had just vacated, as if something had shifted just slightly out of alignment, something small, almost invisible, but enough to make her notice that for all the control she held, for all the precision in her world, there were still things that didn't follow her rules, and for the first time that morning, she felt it. Not confusion, not curiosity exactly, but a pause, quiet and unfamiliar, like a question she didn't yet know how to ask. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the crowd shifted without looking, making space for people who mattered and tightening around those who did not. Marcus stepped in with the same steady pace, standing near the back with his hands relaxed at his sides, eyes calm, not searching for approval, not avoiding it either, just present, the kind of presence that did not ask for permission. Victoria entered a moment later, her assistant already listing updates in a low voice. Quarterly projections, a delayed shipment, a meeting pushed forward by 10 minutes, the air in the elevator adjusted around her, shoulders straightened, conversations died mid-sentence. Even the silence felt more structured. She did not look at Marcus at first, not intentionally, just habit. Her world trained her to filter, to prioritize, to ignore what did not serve a purpose. But then the elevator jerked slightly between floors, a brief pause, nothing alarming, just enough to break the rhythm. Someone near the front exhaled sharply. Another checked their phone as if it could fix the delay, and in That small disruption. Victoria's eyes shifted again, landing on Marcus without warning. He did not move, did not sigh, did not glance at the numbers above the door. He simply stood there, balanced, like waiting was not something to resist, but something to allow. She noticed his hands, still, steady, not clenched, not restless, and for a moment, the contrast pressed against her awareness. Her assistant kept talking, but the words blurred. Victoria raised a hand slightly, a silent signal, and the voice stopped. The elevator remained still for another few seconds, long enough for discomfort to surface in the room, long enough for people to reveal themselves in small ways, a tap of a shoe, a forced cough, a glance toward her for reassurance. Marcus did none of it. When the elevator resumed its motion, the shift was almost disappointing, as if something had been cut short before it could fully unfold. The doors opened on the executive floor, and Victoria stepped out first, the hallway. Stretching ahead in polished quiet, her assistant resumed the update, but Victoria did not immediately respond. She slowed just slightly, enough for the rhythm of her own schedule to feel out of sync. Marcus stepped out behind her, turning toward a side corridor that most people did not notice, and that was when she spoke, not loud, not commanding, just enough to reach him. You. The word hung in the air, unfamiliar on her tongue when used without a title attached. Marcus turned, meeting her. Gaze without hesitation, not challenging, not deferential, just direct. Yes, ma'am, he said, his voice even. She studied him for a second longer than necessary, searching for something she could name. Something that would place him back into a category she understood. You are not in a hurry, she said. It was not a question, but it carried one. Marcus considered it. Not overthinking, just honest. I get where I need to go, he replied. No edge, no attempt to impress. The answer settled between them in a way that did not resolve anything. Victoria felt it, the lack of friction, the absence of performance, and it unsettled her more than resistance would have. Her assistant shifted slightly, waiting for direction, for dismissal, for anything that would restore the familiar order. Victoria gave a small nod, not to Marcus, but to the moment itself, and turned away, continuing down the hall. But something had changed, not in the building, not in the schedule, but in the space between what she expected and what she had just encountered. And as she walked, she found herself aware of it, the quiet difference. The man who moved through a world obsessed with proving worth, without proving anything at all. The conference room was already full when Victoria walked in, glass walls catching the late morning light and bending it into sharp reflections across the long table. Every seat occupied by someone who had earned their place there or believed they had. Laptops open, screens glowing with numbers that carried weight. Conversations paused the moment she entered, not out of respect alone, but expectation. She took her seat at the head without hesitation, setting her phone face down beside a neatly aligned folder. Control returned to her like a reflex. Voices resumed. Reports began. Each sentence measured. Each update crafted to prove value, to justify presence. And yet somewhere beneath the flow of efficiency, something remained slightly out of place, not visible, not named, but present. Victoria listened, nodded, asked precise questions, but her attention was not as absolute as it usually was. A detail here, a number there, all correct, all polished, and still it felt like a performance she had seen too many times. Outside the glass, movement continued, employees passing through the corridor with purpose, each step calculated, each expression curated, and then she saw him. Again, not inside the room, not at the table, but beyond it. Marcus moved down the hallway with a small utility cart, stopping briefly to adjust a loose panel near the wall. No audience, no urgency, just the task in front of him, done with care that did not need recognition. Victoria's gaze lingered a fraction longer than necessary. One of the executives noticed her distraction and followed her line of sight. Maintenance, he said lightly, as if that explained everything, as if the word itself carried enough dismissal to close the observation. Victoria did not respond. Her eyes returned to the table, but the image stayed, not because of what Marcus was doing, but how he was doing it. The meeting continued. Projections, strategies, discussions about expansion and positioning, words that filled the room but did not always settle into something real. And then a minor issue surfaced. A scheduling conflict that threatened to delay a key presentation later that afternoon. Nothing critical, but inconvenient enough to create tension. Voices overlapped. Suggestions came quickly, each one carrying a subtle attempt to stand out, to be the solution. Victoria listened, her expression unchanged, until the room quieted just enough for her to speak. "We adjust the sequence," she said simply, her voice cutting through the noise without effort. The solution was straightforward, almost obvious once stated. Heads nodded. Relief replaced the tension, and just like that, the problem dissolved. But as the meeting moved forward, Victoria felt it again, that quiet imbalance, the difference between solving something because it mattered and solving something because it was expected. When the meeting finally ended, chairs slid back, conversations resumed in lower tones, people gathered their things with a sense of completion. Victoria remained seated for a moment longer, her gaze drifting once more to the hallway. Marcus was gone now, the panel fixed, the cart moved on, no trace left behind. And yet the absence felt noticeable, like a sound that had stopped too soon. Her assistant approached with the next item. Another meeting, another decision waiting. Victoria stood, smoothing the front of her jacket, stepping back into the rhythm she knew so well. But as she walked past the glass walls and into the corridor, she slowed for just a second near the spot where Marcus had been, her hand brushing lightly against the wall he had adjusted, as if confirming something she could not quite articulate. Everything was in place, exactly as it should be, and still, for reasons she could not yet explain, it no longer felt complete. The afternoon settled into the building like a quiet agreement, the kind that made everything look stable even when it was not. Sunlight stretching longer across the floors, softening the sharp edges of glass and steel. And in Victoria's office, the silence felt heavier than usual. Her desk was clear, her schedule intact, every task accounted for. And yet she sat for a moment longer than necessary, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of a document she had already reviewed twice, not because it needed more attention, but because something else had taken its place, something harder to define. She stood, finally, moving toward the window, the city below unfolding in patterns she understood, traffic flowing, people moving with purpose, everything measurable, everything explainable. Except the one thing that had interrupted her day without permission, Marcus Hale, a name she had not asked for but now found herself recalling. Not for what he had done, but for what he had not done. No urgency, no performance, no need to belong to the structure that governed everyone else. A quiet knock at the door broke her thoughts. Her assistant stepped in, tablet in hand. "The vendor team is here for the presentation," she said, precise as always. Victoria nodded once, her posture resetting, her expression returning to its usual clarity. "Send them in," she replied, her voice steady, controlled. The room shifted again as people entered, suits, confident smiles, prepared slides. The presentation began. Charts appeared on the screen, projections, growth curves, numbers designed to impress. And they did, technically flawless, strategically sound, every point aligned with what the company needed. But as the speaker continued, Victoria's attention drifted, not away, but deeper. She watched not just what was being presented, but how. The subtle pauses for effect, the emphasis on results, the careful positioning of success, all of it built to prove something, to secure approval, to validate presence. And suddenly she saw it, not as a strength, but as a pattern, a repetition that felt increasingly hollow. Her eyes shifted briefly to the glass wall, where the reflection of the room blurred into the corridor beyond. And there, again, a glimpse, Marcus passing by, slower than the rest. Not because he lacked direction, but because he did not rush to meet expectations that were not his. He stopped near a workstation where an older employee struggled with a jammed drawer. Marcus set his cart aside, knelt slightly, adjusted something unseen, and the drawer slid open with ease. The employee looked up, surprised, grateful, words forming, but Marcus had already stood, giving a small nod before moving on. No acknowledgement requested. No time taken to receive it. Victoria watched the moment through the reflection, not directly, but clearly enough to feel its weight. The presentation continued. Applause followed the final slide. Hands came together in practiced approval. But Victoria did not join immediately. her gaze still caught in that quiet exchange she had just witnessed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the same authority, but something beneath it had shifted. "Thank you," she said, measured, professional. "We will review and follow up." The meeting concluded. People gathered their materials. Conversations resumed, but Victoria remained still for a second longer, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. Composed, successful, exactly who she had built herself to be. And yet, behind that image, another one lingered, a man who fixed what was in front of him and walked away without needing to be seen. And for the first time in a long while, Victoria felt the difference not as a comparison, but as a question she could not ignore. The building grew quieter as the day leaned toward evening. The sharp pace of the morning softened into something slower, more selective, lights dimming in certain offices, while others stayed bright with unfinished ambition, and Victoria moved through it with the same composed precision, but not the same certainty. Her heels echoed against the marble with a rhythm she had always trusted, yet now each step felt just slightly out of sync with something she could not name. She passed clusters of employees still working, their screens filled with numbers, their voices low but urgent, chasing deadlines that never really ended. And she understood them. She had built this constant motion, this quiet pressure to matter, to be seen, to be ahead. But tonight it felt different, like watching a machine she knew too well, one that ran perfectly but never stopped. Near the far end of the corridor, she saw Marcus again, not as a passing reflection this time, but fully, clearly. He stood beside a vending machine, his posture relaxed, one hand resting lightly on the edge as he waited, not impatient, not distracted, just present in the moment, as if time itself was not something to manage. A small boy stood next to him, no older than 7, holding a crumpled dollar bill with both hands, his eyes fixed on the machine with quiet concentration. Marcus leaned down slightly, speaking to him in a tone too soft to carry across the hall, but the boy nodded, feeding the bill into the slot with careful effort. The machine hummed, paused, then rejected the bill with a dull flicker. The boy frowned, shoulders tightening just enough to show disappointment. Marcus did not react with frustration. He simply took the bill, smoothed it out against his palm, and tried again, slower this time, guiding the edge in with steady patience. The machine accepted it, a small victory. The boy's face lit up in a way that did not need applause. Marcus stepped back, letting him choose. No instruction, no rush, just space. Victoria stopped walking without realizing it, standing just far enough away to observe without being part of it. Something about the simplicity of the moment held her there. The boy selected a snack. The machine delivered it with a soft drop, and he turned immediately to Marcus, offering the first piece without hesitation. Marcus smiled, a small, genuine curve that reached his eyes, and shook his head gently. "It is yours," he said. The boy insisted, pushing it forward again, and this time Marcus accepted, not as a reward, but as respect. They shared the snack in quiet. No transaction, no hierarchy, just a moment that existed for itself. Victoria felt it settle somewhere deeper than she expected, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just steady, like a truth that did not need to announce itself. Her phone vibrated in her hand, breaking the stillness. Another message, another decision waiting. She glanced at the screen, then back at them, but the moment had already moved on. Marcus had picked up his small bag, the boy already walking ahead, talking about something only he found important, and Marcus listened, fully, without checking the time, without looking away, as if nothing else competed for his attention. Victoria stood there for a second longer, the hallway stretching around her, her world still intact, still demanding, and yet something had shifted again, not in what she saw, but in how she understood it, because for the first time, she realized it was not that Marcus did not belong in her world, it was that he was not defined by it, and that difference, quiet as it was, felt larger than anything she had built. The building had thinned out by the time the last wave of evening settled in, the kind of quiet that only came when ambition finally paused long enough to breathe, and Victoria found herself still inside it, her office lights casting a soft reflection against the darkening glass. The city outside now a field of scattered lights instead of motion. She had stayed later than necessary, not because of work, but because leaving felt premature. as if something unfinished remained that was not written. On her schedule, she stepped out into the corridor, her heels softer now against the floor, the echo less sharp without the daytime rush. And as she moved toward the elevator, she slowed again, not out of habit this time, but intention. The hallway ahead was mostly empty. A few distant figures, a janitor cart tucked neatly against the wall, and there, near the far window, Marcus stood alone, not working, not fixing anything, just standing with one hand resting lightly on the frame, looking out at the city as if it were something to observe, not conquer. Victoria approached without announcing herself, her steps measured, controlled, but quieter than usual. When she stopped a few feet away, he turned, not surprised, not guarded, just aware. "Long day," she said, the words simple, almost unfamiliar without an agenda behind them. Marcus nodded once. "They usually are," he replied, his voice steady. She studied him again, not the surface this time, but the absence of something she was used to seeing in others: tension, urgency, the constant pull to be somewhere else. "You do not seem in a hurry to leave," she said, echoing her earlier observation, but now it carried more weight. Marcus glanced back at the window briefly, then returned his gaze to her. "I will get where I need to be," he said, the same words, but now they landed differently, fuller, as if they held something she had not heard before. Victoria felt it, the quiet resistance to everything she had built her world around. "Most people here are trying to get somewhere," she said, not defensive, just stating what had always been true for her. Marcus gave a small nod. "That is fine," he answered, "as long as they know when they have arrived." The sentence hung between them, simple, but it did not resolve into anything she could easily dismiss. She looked at him, really looked this time, not as a role, not as a position, but as a person who existed outside the structure she understood. "And you?" she asked, the question softer now, almost careful. Marcus did not answer immediately, not because he was searching for something clever, but because he did not rush to fill silence. When he spoke, it was quiet, direct. "I have a son waiting at home," he said. "That is enough for me to know where I belong." There was no pride in it, no need for validation, just truth. Victoria felt something shift again, deeper this time. Not a crack, but a recognition, something in her chest tightening just slightly, not discomfort, not pain, but awareness. She nodded once, a gesture that carried more acknowledgement than she intended to show. Her phone buzzed again in her hand, persistent, insistent, pulling her back toward the world she controlled. She glanced at it, then slipped it into her pocket without checking, a small decision, almost invisible, but new. When she looked back up, Marcus had already stepped away from the window, picking up his bag with the same quiet motion. "Good night," he said, polite, steady, and then he turned, walking down the corridor without waiting for a response. Victoria stood there for a moment longer, the city lights reflecting in the glass beside her, her world still intact, still demanding. But something within it had shifted in a way she could no longer ignore, because for the first time, she was not thinking about where she needed to go next. She was thinking about whether she had ever actually arrived. The night air outside Sterling Tower carried a different kind of silence, one that did not belong to deadlines or expectations, but to people returning to lives that did not need to be measured. And Victoria stood just inside the glass doors for a moment longer than usual, her reflection faint against the dark street beyond. The doorman nodded as he held the door open, but she did not move immediately, her hand resting lightly against the cool metal frame as if she were deciding something that had no place on her calendar. Across the street, Marcus was walking toward a modest sedan parked under a street lamp, the same steady pace, the same absence of urgency. And for reasons she did not fully understand, Victoria stepped outside, the sound of the city softer now, less demanding, her heels quieter against the concrete as she moved in his direction, not calling out, not announcing herself, just closing the distance with a calm she had not planned. Marcus reached his car and opened the back door first. A small figure climbed out from the seat, rubbing his eyes, the boy from earlier, still holding the crumpled wrapper from the vending machine. Marcus crouched slightly, adjusting the boy's jacket, his movements careful, practiced. "You stayed up," he said, not as a reprimand, but as a quiet observation. The boy nodded, his voice small but certain. I wanted to. Wait. Marcus smiled. The same quiet expression, no performance, just warmth. Next time you wait at home. He replied gently, closing the car door with a soft click. Victoria stopped a few steps away, close enough to hear, far enough not to interrupt. Something about the scene held her still, not dramatic, not extraordinary, just real in a way she had not allowed herself to notice before. Marcus stood, taking the boy's hand without looking at it, as if the gesture had been repeated so many times it no longer required thought. They began to walk, the boy talking about something from his day, words tumbling out without structure, and Marcus listened, not correcting, not redirecting, just present in a way that made every word matter. Victoria felt it again, that quiet shift, deeper now, not just in how she saw him, but in how she saw everything around her. Her phone buzzed again, persistent, pulling at her attention, but she did not reach for it this time. She let it ring once, twice, then fall silent, her focus staying where it had settled, on a man who did not seem to need anything from the world she controlled, and a child who trusted that completely. Marcus paused briefly as they reached the corner, glancing back toward the building, not searching, just aware. His eyes met Victoria's for a moment, not surprised, not questioning, just acknowledging. She held the gaze longer than she intended, then gave a small nod, something between recognition and respect. Marcus returned it, simple, unspoken, then turned back to the boy, continuing down the sidewalk until they disappeared into the rhythm of the city. Victoria stood there alone, the glass tower rising behind her, the world she had built still intact, still waiting, but it no longer felt as solid as it had that morning, not because it had changed, but because she had, just enough to notice that for all its structure, all its precision, it had never taught her how to stand still and simply belong. And as she finally turned back toward the entrance, her reflection caught her again in the glass, composed, successful, exactly as before, but now carrying something new, a quiet awareness that success without presence had always been incomplete, and for the first time, she did not rush to step past it. Morning arrived without asking permission, the city already moving before the sun had fully settled into the sky, and inside Sterling Tower, everything resumed its rhythm as if nothing had shifted at all. Elevators filled, voices returned, schedules tightened, and Victoria stepped through the revolving doors with the same composed presence she had carried for years. But something in her pace was different, not slower, not hesitant, just less driven by the need to arrive before anyone else. The receptionist greeted her. Her assistant approached with the usual updates, meetings, numbers, decisions waiting. But Victoria did not respond immediately. Her eyes moved through the lobby with a quiet intention that had not been there before. She noticed things she had always filtered out. A man adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass. A woman rehearsing a presentation under her breath. A janitor carefully aligning chairs that no one would thank him for. And for a moment, it all felt visible in a way it had not before. She moved toward the elevator, but stopped halfway. The decision small, almost invisible. Her assistant paused, confused for a second. Is something wrong? She asked softly. Victoria shook her head once. No, she said, her voice calm. But there was a pause after it, a space she allowed instead of filling. I will take a minute. The words surprised even her, not because they were difficult, but because she had never needed to say them before. Her assistant nodded, stepping back, uncertain but compliant. Victoria turned slightly, her gaze settling near the seating area by the windows, and there he was again, Marcus, seated this time. Not working, not fixing, just sitting beside his son, the boy holding a small notebook, flipping through pages filled with uneven drawings. Marcus leaned in, listening as the boy explained something with quiet excitement, pointing at shapes that only made sense to him. Marcus nodded, asking a question now and then. Not correcting, not guiding too much, just present in a way that gave the moment room to exist. Victoria watched from a distance, not hidden, but not part of it either. Something about the simplicity held her there, not as an observer of difference, but as someone beginning to understand it. The boy finished his explanation, looking up with expectation. Marcus smiled, not exaggerated, not performative, just enough. That looks like a plan, he said. The boy nodded, satisfied. Closing the notebook with a sense of completion that did not need validation, Victoria felt something settle again, quieter this time. Not a shift, but a confirmation. Her phone vibrated in her hand. She glanced at it briefly, a message marked urgent, the kind that would normally pull her attention immediately, but she did not open it. Not yet. She let the moment finish before she moved. Marcus looked up then, noticing her without surprise, his expression unchanged, steady. She met his gaze, not as a CEO this time, not as someone above or apart, just as someone standing in the same space. She gave a small nod, not out of habit, but recognition. He returned it. Simple, unspoken. The boy followed his father's gaze, glancing at Victoria with quiet curiosity. She offered a small smile, brief but real, then stepped back, turning toward the elevator again. The world resumed around her, the movement, the urgency, the expectations waiting, but something remained different, not in what she had to do, but in how she would do it, because for the first time, she understood that control was not the same as presence, and as the elevator doors closed in front of her reflection, she did not adjust her posture. She did not check her phone. She simply stood there, still, allowing the moment to exist without needing to shape it into something more. The day moved forward, as it always did, measured in meetings, decisions, and outcomes that could be tracked and reported, and Victoria sat at the head of another conference table, voices rising and falling around her, numbers displayed across a wide screen, projections refined down to the smallest detail, everything working exactly as it should, and yet something fundamental had shifted beneath it all. She listened. She responded. She guided the room with the same clarity that had built her reputation. But there was a difference now, subtle, almost invisible. She no longer leaned forward to control every second. She allowed pauses, small ones, but real, moments where silence existed without being filled. And in those moments, she noticed things she had missed before, the hesitation in a junior analyst's voice, the way one executive looked relieved when not interrupted, the quiet rhythm beneath the noise. When the meeting ended, there was no dramatic change, no announcement, just a steady close. People gathered their materials, nodding, moving on to what came next, and Victoria remained seated for a second longer, not because she needed to, but because she chose to, her reflection faint in the polished surface of the table, composed, successful, unchanged, and yet not the same. She stood, walking out into the corridor where the building continued its precise motion, and for a brief moment, she stopped near the window overlooking the city, her hand resting lightly against the glass, not as a gesture, but as a quiet anchor. The skyline stretched out before her, towers rising with intention, each one built to prove something, to stand above, to be seen, and she understood that world. She had shaped her life within it, but now she saw something else as well, something that did not rise, did not compete, but simply existed with its own kind of weight. Marcus passed by behind her, pushing his cart, the same steady pace, the same quiet presence. Nothing about him had changed, and that was the point. He did not need to. He moved through the same space without being defined by it, without adjusting himself to match its demands. Victoria turned slightly, watching him for a second, not as a question anymore, but as an understanding she had earned piece by piece. He did not stop, did not look for acknowledgement, and she did not call out. She did not need to, because the recognition was already there, settled, complete. He continued down the corridor, disappearing into the rhythm of the building, leaving no mark that could be measured, no result that could be reported, and yet the impact remained, quiet but undeniable. Victoria exhaled slowly, not a release of tension, but something closer to clarity. She straightened, not out of habit, but awareness, and as she turned back toward her office, her phone buzzed again. The same world waiting, the same expectations, but this time, she did not rush to meet them. She walked with the same steady pace she had seen in him, not slower, not faster, just present. And when she reached her office, she paused before entering, her reflection in the glass meeting her eyes once more, composed, capable, exactly who she had always been, but now carrying something else, something